So I was talking yesterday about the gift of Holy Week as a time, an ordinary time, to refine our sense of the spiritual dimension. And we do that in these days through our listening to Scripture, to the Scriptures, to reading the book of nature as we walk around the land here, and by being awake and mindful in all of the small interactions and tasks of daily life. And the Gospel of today, I think, describes this very beautifully. It's the Gospel from chapter 12 of John, where 6 days before the Passover, which is 6 days before his death, Jesus went to Bethany. I was in Bethany a few weeks ago on the pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and now, of course, it's a little town, but it was then a village within walking distance of Jerusalem. So Jesus was, on this occasion, as on the other occasion described in the Gospel of Luke, where he meets with Martha and Mary, and Martha gets a little overwhelmed by her many tasks. So it's a home of his friends, Martha, Mary, two very different personalities, and Lazarus, who had become quite a celebrity because Jesus had raised him from the dead. So he's on his way to Jerusalem a second time, it seems, and then he stops at the house of his friends, who give him a dinner. Martha waited on them, as one would expect. And Mary, her more contemplative sister, brings in a jar of very expensive ointment. And she opens it and anoints the feet of Jesus with it, and wipes his feet with her hair, which is a detail that would have been quite shocking in that very rigid patriarchal society. I don't suppose women shouldn't have been maybe touching him at all, and certainly not wiping his feet with her hair. And then it says, the house was full of the scent of the ointment. Then Judas Iscariot, who we know well, complained about the waste of money, that the ointment could have been sold and the money given to the poor. And St. John uses this to rather demonize Judas. We'll talk and think later about the role that Judas plays in the story. But here he's described as a thief. He doesn't really care about the poor, he just likes to take money out of the petty cash and keep it for himself. But Jesus defends Mary. The second time, actually, he defends Mary. The first time he defends her with her sister, and now he defends her, the contemplative, dimension to Judas. Leave her alone, he says. She had to keep this scent for the day of my burial. So, and then he says these surprising words to the modern ear. The poor you will always have with you, but you will not always have me. So clearly, Jesus is very compassionate and very caring for the poor, for good works, for sharing with the needs, responding to the needs of others. But here he's talking about a different kind of value, a different set of values. He's not saying this means you shouldn't be concerned about the poor, but he's saying we have to give full respect to this dimension of reality that Mary is expressing in this slightly irrational way, or certainly not very economic way. And of course, we might look ahead and remember later in the Gospel of John, Mary goes to the tomb to anoint Jesus on the Sunday morning with the traditional ointments, and she finds the tomb empty. So this story has many dimensions. That's why we read it every year and frequently. In the spiritual dimension, all time becomes present. We move in and out of the past, not only by remembering the past in a nostalgic way. I've been unpacking my bags here, or my boxes here, and came across some photograph albums I hadn't looked at for years, and other things, including a letter from Debbie and John I found the other day for my anniversary of my ordination. And so, I stop for a few minutes and look at the pictures or feel connected through memory to these events or moments of the past. So that's one way of making the past present. We also have the part, through imagination, through nostalgia, but we also carry the past in our cells. That's why sometimes when people are having a massage or body work, a memory, maybe a repressed memory of the past, suddenly leaps into the present. So when I'm talking about the past becoming present in the spiritual dimension, it's not only through memory. It's as if there is a connection, a meaningful connection between the things that happened to us yesterday and 20 years ago and where we are now and who we are now. There is a living connection. It's not just remembering something, it's becoming aware of what is already present. And even the future, in a sense, becomes present to us in the spiritual dimension. That doesn't mean that we can foresee the future imaginatively and know exactly what's going to happen. Sometimes people do seem to have gifts or moments where they anticipate the future. You know, sometimes you pick up the phone and the person tells you, "Oh, I was just phoning you myself. I just picked up the phone to call you." Anyway, so there are these sort of events, and animals, for example, seem to have this sense of being able to anticipate an earthquake or a tsunami. Animals can be trained to warn an epileptic that an attack is coming, a seizure is coming. Fishermen, regardless of the weather forecast, often have a sense of when a storm is about to break. So there is those rather mysterious psychic phenomena, which most of us, I think, don't experience. But when I talk about the future being present in the spiritual dimension, again, in the same way that we speak about the past being present, it's not by projection forward or nostalgia looking back. It's about seeing how deep and rich the present is in the spiritual dimension. In God, we could also say. God says to Moses, "I am." God is being. Being includes all the dimensions of time that we are aware of, past, present, and future. So the spiritual dimension opens our minds and our senses, all our ways of perception, to the significance of things, to the multi-layered richness of reality, to the many dimensions. In physics and science today, there are some researchers are claiming that there could be, I forget the number, anything up to 26 different dimensions of reality. So certainly many more than we can, you know, we're pretty tied to the dimensions of time and space. So, but as the spiritual dimension opens for us, everything becomes more significant, because we see how much is enfolded, how much is contained in the spiritual dimension. In fact, everything is in the spiritual dimension. In God, we live and move and have our being. Okay. So everything is a sign, therefore, in that sense. So just as the scent of that ointment filled the house at that moment, that significant moment when Mary anointed the feet of Jesus. So in the same way, as our spiritual dimension expands, we are able to sense, to smell the spiritual reality, to smell God, the perfume of God, we might say, in everything in our lives. There is nothing that is alien to, or anything that is not touched by the presence of God. God is in everything as the mystics say, and everything is in God. Now that's a concept, or maybe a very abstract or philosophical concept at one level, but it's also a very transformative experience. And I think it is the experience that begins to unfold as we learn to meditate seriously. So how do we open this spiritual dimension, which changes the way we see life and therefore the way we deal or respond to all the events and encounters of life? Well, certainly meditation is one way in which we open this spiritual dimension. Certainly, following a religious practice or a spiritual practice, or let's say following a spiritual practice in a religious framework. That's another way of opening that spiritual dimension. This is what we're doing this week on retreat. But we can bring this work of opening the spiritual dimension to everything we do. Our ordinary professional work, the work we get paid for. I was talking to an executive recently who was telling me that he felt that he was in danger of getting bored by his job. And you wouldn't have thought he could be bored because it was a very stressful, demanding, exciting job. And he was at the top of the ladder. He was enjoying, the benefits and the achievement of his career. So it was a little strange to hear him say he was bored or frightened that he might become bored. And I think what he meant was that, as he explained it, he said it meant that he knew that he could handle anything that the job threw at him. A crisis, challenge, difficult situations. It was always different, so it wasn't boring in the sense that it was the same every day. But at the same time, he knew he could handle it. He developed the basic skills, he had the basic knowledge, and so he was reflecting upon what was the meaning of his work. And he came to this interesting conclusion that he wanted to use the rest of his time at work to develop the way he worked with the people he worked with. His relationships with his team, with his assistants, and because he was aware of certain faults in his character, he could become very impatient, angry when things were not done as he asked. And he said one aspect of his character that he didn't like was when somebody failed to do something as he wanted. He could be very harsh with them and sort of make them feel a failure, put them down. That was their punishment, really. He wasn't a sadistic person, he wasn't a cruel person, but he knew this was something he had to control in himself. So, in other words, although he was functioning in the familiar dimensions of his life, using his skills and dealing with events. At the same time, he was focused upon this other dimension, which was not only a dimension that affected him and his relationship to himself and his own personal growth, his own personal change, but also, of course, would affect very immediately the people he worked with. So I would say that was a spiritual dimension. He was touching in to this deeper life of relationship in his work and his interactions with other people. And because of that, I would imagine that when he has a meeting with one of his team and has to be critical, or he has to talk to them about something they've failed in, he will be very conscious of how he does it, very self-aware, and, if necessary, self-restrained, and control his anger or control his language. And that consciousness in the present moment is also a sign of the spiritual dimension. So, as the spiritual dimension opens, everything becomes significant. We can't read these signs as if they were entries in a telephone directory. But we are able to relate to them, to every detail of life, with a sense of connection. Now, the brain works by filtering information. And some people who have something wrong with their brain suffer greatly because they can't filter or prioritize the data that is coming into their consciousness through their senses. And it's, I don't know if you saw the new version of Sherlock Holmes with Benedict Cumberbatch, the actor. It makes it very clear that he has that kind of mind, which is also explains his peculiar and rather antisocial personality, how it's difficult for him to relate to other people, because his mind is taking in every detail. You know, he looks at you and he'll tell you every detail of your life. You know, so the brain works healthily by filtering what we absorb and think about and relate to, and some things are more important than others. As we move into the house here in Bonnevaux, we're all walking around looking at little things. Generally, the work has been done very well, but we're also inevitably finding doors that the handles don't work, or taps which don't work as they should, or little details that we have to remember and keep a note of and speak to the workers about. So hopefully after a few weeks we won't be doing that. We won't be looking at every door handle we open or every tap we turn on. But this sense of connection to our environment is very important for us and for the world. Perhaps it's because we have lost a sense of personal connection to the environment, to nature, that we are in danger of destroying, or we are already destroying, our ecological balance. and our own home. We are treating it very badly, exploiting it unwisely, because we don't feel connected with it. We feel that it's just a resource to be exploited. We're not aware of, we don't allow ourselves, or the people who are responsible for these decisions, don't recognize the network of relationships that makes up our ecology. Just as in our personal life, if you have one, at a particular moment, you have one very difficult, painful relationship, say with your spouse, you're going through a difficult time with them, well, that's going to affect everything else in your life. You won't be talking about it or even thinking about it when you go to work or deal with other issues unrelated to your home or family or marriage. But, of course, that disconnection or that difficult relationship is going to have an impact upon everything else in your life. So that's what's happening, I think, in a way, between the human family and our environment to which we belong. So without a spiritual dimension, in the sense that I'm using it, without a spiritual dimension, it will be very difficult for us to take the decisions necessary to restore our relationship to the environment. We've already, I think, got the scientific and even the economic answers to our ecological crisis. We know what to do. Why can't we do it? Why aren't we doing it? So the scriptures are full of this sense of the spiritual dimension. Scriptures are composed of descriptions of significant events and significant words, the full meaning of which is not limited to the time in which they happened or were spoken, the full meaning of which continues to engage us with a sense of connection to what happened in Bethany or on the Mount of Olives or in Bodh Gaya in India or wherever. We ignore this dimension at our peril. Now, this spiritual dimension by itself is not enough to run the world or run our own lives in a practical sense. We have to have our shopping lists, we have to pay our bills, we have to make long-term decisions, we have to deal with problems of the moment. So, just to say that we only have to be spiritual and everything else is immediately and automatically taken care of is a little naive. And in fact, when you look at the great contemplatives of all traditions, we see how practical they were. Especially, take an example like Teresa of Avila, Saint Teresa of Avila. Very practical, pragmatic woman and leader of her community, engaging with the controversies of her time. So the spiritual dimension is not a separate dimension that we retreat into and escape from the mess of life, the problems of life. But if the spiritual dimension is open and the connections are being felt and experienced, then our common sense and our rationality will operate much better. This is why people say often, I'm too busy to meditate, I don't have time for this contemplative work. But those who are very busy, like the executive I mentioned earlier, realize that if they don't meditate, the pressure of life and the volume of work easily overwhelms them. They lose clarity, they lose judgment, they lose the human connection. Now, there's a letter that Winston Churchill's wife wrote to him early in the war. It was a very stressful moment. They were waiting for Britain to be invaded, and he was operating under great pressure. And she wrote to him and said, "Dear Winnie," or whatever she called him, she said, several people have remarked to me that, and your friends especially, how badly you are treating them. And she said, this isn't like you. And I know she probably only saw him a short time every day. So she said, this isn't like you. So just try to be more like yourself and be nicer to people, especially your friends who you need at this moment. So I don't know how he responded to the letter, but in a way you could see that in a way she was his spiritual dimension. She was reminding him, awakening him to the way in which he should do his work. And this is what meditation does for us. It calls to mind common sense and rationality in the daily work that we perform. And at a social level, it means also that we avoid voting foolishly in large numbers in referendums or presidential elections. In other words, the more people there are who are in touch with the spiritual dimension, the more wisdom there is in the environment, in the collective consciousness, in society. Again, it's not something you can measure, but it's something that has a very real impact on events. And wisdom, the Latin word for wisdom is sapientia, and it comes from the Latin sapere, to taste. So the wise person is someone who knows the taste of reality firsthand, not through reading the menu or the cookery book or thinking about the meal, but somebody who has, or maybe prepared it and tasted it themselves. So the taste of reality is what meditation gives us as it opens the spiritual dimension to us. Now, if we seek the truth, if we see this as an important dimension or an important aspect of our identity that requires time and effort and discipline, if we are seeking the truth, That means we're not just being carried along by this stream of events. That leads to a feeling of stress, a feeling of disconnection, of isolation, not being connected. To have meaning in your life means to be connected. Connected to everything, and to yourself first of all. If you lose your connection with yourself, you begin all the other connections around you, even with the people closest to you, begin to disconnect as well. It's like a plug. These plugs here don't work, unfortunately. So it's just like these plugs, these connections don't work anymore. And these relationships in our lives, which are so important for our connection with reality, begin to disconnect because we are losing the connection with ourselves. So if we seek the truth, this means we are caring for the connections in our lives that give us this taste of reality and will call us back to our true self, and as Winston Churchill's wife, Clemmy, helped him to do. This is why St. Benedict says that the person who comes to the community should be tested and allowed to see whether the community is right for them. But ultimately, the criterion of judgment is very simple. He says, not is this person perfect, not even can I live with this person. The criterion of belonging to a spiritually oriented community is, do they truly seek God? Truly seek God. And if that criterion is fulfilled, if you feel and accept that you are truly seeking God, and you feel that you are with others who are truly seeking God, a connection is created from which community develops. Now, of course, what happens in community is that after a while you are convinced that you are truly seeking God, and your way of seeking God is basically better than that of the people you're living with. And then, before long, you start to judge and dismiss or evaluate the people you're living with. In other words, you see the splinter in their eye, but don't see the big piece of wood in your own eye. Now, if we are truly seeking, we have to be open continually to self-correction, and self-correction ultimately needs external correction as well, because very few of us are really capable of correcting ourselves adequately. So we need the love and the support and the honesty of others in order to maintain our search for God truly. If that happens and we allow ourselves to be helped, this is community. This is why Jesus was at Bethany with Martha and Mary and Lazarus and all the other people who were there. This is why he developed this community of disciples who were certainly not perfect people, but he remained faithful to that community even when they were unfaithful. So if we somehow remain in this network of relationships that allows us to seek God and to expand our network of connections with reality, in work, in nature, in love, in beauty, in all the different beautiful aspects of life that makes life interesting, creative, sometimes very difficult and sometimes dark, but also ultimately alive. Then, if we are seeking God, we will also need to express what we find. To seek, Jesus tells us, is to find. Whoever seeks will find. Whoever knocks on the door will be opened. Whoever asks will receive. Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Gregory of Nyssa, Saint Grégoire de Nice, said that it is true that we will always find if we seek, but then when we find, we don't stop there. We don't achieve a final goal or end. We are always seeking. We always set out again on another stage of the journey. In other words, the spiritual dimension is without limit. A symbol of that, perhaps, for us is our knowledge that we live in an expanding universe. Whatever was the force of creation that brought this universe into existence, this cosmos into existence, it is continuing. It's a physical energy, and it's pushing the boundaries of the universe out. We don't know into what the universe is expanding. But we are a little piece of dust in the middle of this expanding universe. But we are more than a little piece of dust. Human consciousness is an integral part of this cosmic expansion, of this cosmic reality. And this is one of the very deep and important signs and meaning that come to us through the scriptures in this week. The importance of the human. And tomorrow we'll explore that a little more as we look at what the spiritual dimension in different traditions says to us about the nature of reality, and how what Jesus expresses in his teaching and of course in his life, which is a perfect expression of his teaching. He teaches not only with words but with life, with his actions, with his responses to life. How what Jesus expresses resonates with the universal wisdom and brings it into a more fully human focus and clarity.